SicEm365 Radio. It's time for our weekly segment with Mickey Spagnola of DallasCowboys.com. Brought to you by the First National Bank of Central Texas, with 5 locations to serve you.
All right, 4:32 is the time on SicEm365 Radio. We'll be joined by Mickey Spagnola, DallasCowboys.com in a moment. Craig Smoak, Paul Catalina. I'm David Smoak, along with Armstrong and Jack and Connor as well. Here on 101 Elm Street, Mickey now joins us on SicEm365 Radio. So, Mickey, Dan Quinn, we knew that the last time we spoke with you, and now he's filling out his staff as well. Is anything? I think even they have the strength and conditioning coach because of the tragic loss of Marcus Paul filled as well. Anything missing on staff right now?
They fill 3. I'm not sure. I mean, they may add somebody, linebacker coach. I don't know how many changes they will make at that point. And I'll be interesting to see with the addition of the defensive line coach, that if he's really the defensive line coach or if Dan Quinn's going to do like Marinelli did. You remember Marinella was the defensive coordinator, but he also took care of the defensive line. And this guy that they hired, Aiden Durd, is pretty young. He doesn't have that much experience. So I'm wondering if he's a guy that's just kind of a Dan Quinn guy that can help out, but that Dan Quinn would, emphasize his coaching on the defensive line. But other than that, I think with Kellen Moore looking like he's going to be back after it looks like the Eagles are going a different direction for their head coaching job. It looks like they're probably pretty set at what they'll be doing going forward. But as I put it out in my notes column yesterday, I just don't think it's surprising that there's going to be so many changes on a defensive staff that basically took the defense from the year before with almost the same personnel, not exactly the same, that finished 9th overall, that fell to 23rd, that finished 11th against the run, that finished the 31st. So I think there's some culpability in what was going on with that defensive staff. I think the interesting thing would be if George Edwards, he's being interviewed for the defensive coordinator job with the Bears, if he is not hired there, that he comes back and he's probably takes over more of the duties of the linebackers coach.
Mickey, what about Sean Lee coming right into coaching if he does in fact retire, which I know a lot of people expect?
Yeah, I just don't know. It sometimes it's pretty. I mean, he's already been coaching the team, right? The linebackers already. I just don't know if that's what he wants to do. You know, we just assume that these players that look like they're pretty good coaches would be coaches they want to coach. You got to remember, there's one thing to show up for work at 7:30 and leave at 4. There's another thing to show up at 6 and leave at 11 o'clock at night. So you have to kind of decide, is this what I really want to do? Now, I think at some point he might, but I don't know that he just says, yeah, I want to do this. But if he does, hire him tomorrow.
Mickey, what do you think of Nick Sirianni as the new Eagles head coach? And obviously that eliminates Kellen Moore from that potential position. But what are your thoughts on that move by Philadelphia?
I have no idea who he is.
That says a lot.
You know what? And if you ask me about the other guys that have been named head coaches, I have no idea who they are. You know, the NFL, these owners, I think they have a difficulty hiring head coaches. And just because you're a good coordinator doesn't mean you're going to be a good head coach. But that's what they do. They hire coordinators to become head coaches. And if you look at what's been going on, I think there's, six this year, 7?
6.
5 last year. Okay, and 5 last year. And if you go back to 2019, I think there was another 6 or 7. So they're going through, I think I figured out since 2018 that there's been 27 head coaches hired. Think about that. The turnover. And some of those, and that doesn't mean 2017, because some of those teams have turned over twice already. So I just feel sorry for these guys because it's very hard to figure out who's going to be a good head coach. That's why I think Detroit, that was a bold move, hiring Dan Campbell. He wasn't a coordinator. At one time, he was interim head coach in Miami after the guy got fired that he was working for. But maybe he is more of a CEO type guy. And it's one thing to be in the room in front of one group. Now you're in the room in front of the entire group. And sometimes it doesn't work out so well. And the other thing, I think these guys that were coordinators make the mistake is the reason they got hired is because they were a good coordinator. Then they become the head coach, and then they hire somebody to coordinate the job that their expertise was in. So I think, if I was the offensive coordinator and I got hired to be the head coach, I'm telling them I'm the head coach and I'm the offensive coordinator.
So what's going on, do you think, with Eric Bieniemy? I just reading a story here, Alex Smith, Washington quarterback, saying that he doesn't understand it, ridiculous. We hear some of the reasons, or we hear of what could be some of the reasons because there's, 3 or 4 black head coaches in the NFL. What do you think is the deal? Have you heard anything at all of why he continues to not either get opportunities or gets passed by?
Do people that are hiring think he's really coordinating the Kansas City offense, or is it Andy Reid? Does he have a title? But it was sort of like, remember when Bill Parcells was here and he had all these pass game coordinators and run game coordinators, and he basically was calling the plays. So is Eric Bieniemy calling the plays in Kansas City, or is it Andy Reid? And I think maybe some folks think, well, maybe it's not that quite, cut and dried. Think about what's happened in New England, with Belichick. You had to think he was coordinating the defense, right? But he's had defensive coordinators get hired to be head coaches, and they failed. So were they really coordinating the defense, or were they the secretary and Belichick was coordinating defense? So I think when you're hiring these coordinators, you have to have some sense of, it was actually their job. They weren't just there in title only. And maybe he is. I don't know. I have no idea. But all I know is when I watch the Kansas City Chiefs play, Andy Reid's got the call sheet in front of him, and it looks like he's talking on the headset, sending in plays.
Sometimes names of what you do on a team, college football can do this, the associate head coach or, a passing game coordinator. Isn't that sometimes another way just to pay somebody more money?
And sometimes it is. I was thinking when I mentioned Belichick, Matt Patricia, he was the defensive coordinator, right? Mm-hmm. Well, was he? Because he certainly didn't coordinate a very good defense when he got to Detroit, end up losing the job. You got to be careful these titles, I think. Sometimes you need to have intimate knowledge of exactly what these guys are doing. And I'm not trying to disparage Eric Bieniemy, and I don't know how well he interviews or anything like that. And again, the other question is, when you interview for a head coach, you better walk in there and tell them, here's my idea of a staff. These are the guys I want to hire. You better know that, because it's one thing to get the job, but now do you know enough people to bring in as a staff? And I was just reading something about Dan Campbell, that before he had the interview in Detroit, he had evidently written some sort of, I don't know if it was a paper or what, his philosophy on coaching, his philosophy on football, and he sent it to the lady owner before he showed up. And her remark was, when I read this, I thought I was reading exactly what I was looking for in a head coach. So, and I remember when Jack Del Rio got the head coaching job in Jacksonville, and he had never been a head coach before. He was a defensive coordinator. And when he talked to whoever was the head coach at that time with him, when he was the defensive coordinator, I think it was in Baltimore, they kind of told him, you show up and you may not get this job because you don't have much experience, but go in there because this is good practice and act like you're going to get the job. Well, he showed up with some sort of some kind of computer program thing to show his whole plan on, if I'm the head coach, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm hiring. And they were so impressed they hired him. They didn't intend to hire him, but he killed him in the interview. So a lot of times the interview has a lot to do with if you get the job or not if you're black, white, yellow, green, whatever. It has to do with how well you handle the interview.
Mike McCarthy was hired by Dallas for what? Was it his resume, his offensive ability to call plays? Because they already had Kellen Moore and they were going to keep him. So what was the 1 or 2, 3 characteristics of why he was hired by Dallas?
I think because he had head coaching experience. I don't think they wanted to go from having a head coach with 9 years of head coaching experience to having a guy that was going to practice being a head coach on their dime, meaning never had been a head coach before. What the Cowboys were looking for, and I'm convinced, is a guy that had head coaching experience in the NFL, and on top of that, might have had some success. Because I'm always scared of retread head coaches, like guys that have been out for 3, 4, 5 years, and then all of a sudden they reemerge and they want to be the head coach. And what I worry about if you hire somebody like that is they've been out of the game so long, they might have forgotten how hard they had to work to be successful as a head coach. And so what the Cowboys were looking for, I mean, McCarthy had only been out a year, but he had success as a head coach, and he had the experience of being a head coach. It wasn't like hiring a coordinator and say, okay, see if you can be a head coach. You know, I want to see some proof. And I think that's what McCarthy had for him, and why they kind of knew what they were going to do. Not like what is Philadelphia? Were they on their 12th interview?
Yeah. The Eagles,
I mean, think about it. If I'm in charge and I fire my head coach, I want to have a good idea of what I want to do. I don't want this all comers meet, right? Let me talk to a dozen guys and I'm going to pick one. Or am I just waiting to somebody to knock my socks off? You know, I think I should have a pretty good idea. Otherwise, you may end up with worse than what you had in the first place.
Yeah, that's a lot of people to put in a group text to say you're not getting the job.
Yeah.
Well,
it's just. I almost feel sorry for these owners because it's certainly not an exact science. You know, sometimes you hit, and then if you hit with one guy, like, do you remember Wade Phillips' line about McVay? When guys that were working for him were getting hired as head coaches, he came out and said, well, my son, he knows McVay, you know, and it was a joke, but he was saying, you know, if you had association with a head coach that was successful, then I'm going to hire that guy because he's been around success.
Mickey, anything else, Craig? Paul? Thank you, Mickey. Your thoughts about the championship games, Packers hosting Tom Brady. What an incredible story again with him as he's taken the Bucs. And, yeah, there's others who are doing it as well, but he has looked really sharp the last several weeks after middle of the year, a little bit, you know, some bumps and bruises. Your thoughts about that game, and then, of course, the Bills and how good they look against Kansas City. And we all know Mahomes is going to play. We just don't know how effectively he'll be.
Yeah, and you know, we think he's going to play, but he's still not out of the concussion protocol, right? And I would imagine today and tomorrow are going to be very significant because you've got to prove that you can do strenuous physical activity 2 days in a row without coming back with any symptoms. And so I think I saw something that said he was limited again today, but he's still in the protocol. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. If he plays, I think Kansas City's probably got a pretty good chance of winning that game. But if not, I'm all in on Buffalo. I just liked the way they were playing down the stretch. They weren't just getting by. They were beating people. And so I kind of like them. if Mahomes doesn't play. And then I just kind of worry about the Tampa Bay defense. Was it for real against New Orleans? Because I don't know that defense can go up to Green Bay and do that again. I think Saints had some problems, some injury problems. Michael Thomas disappeared. I mean, he was hurt. He needs surgeries. And they really didn't have a wide receiver that could step up and help Drew Brees, who couldn't get the ball down the field. So I would lean towards the Packers, and not because they're at home, because it's not much of a home field advantage. And I don't want to hear about weather because Tom Brady's been playing in weather for 20 years, right? So that's kind of the way I'm sort of leaning on the games. But you know what it made me think of, David? And I'm going to write about it tomorrow in my column on DallasCowboys.com. You remember the 93 NFC title game when Troy Aikman had the concussion?
Yep.
In the third quarter, and he didn't know who won the Super Bowl the year before. He didn't know where that year's Super Bowl was going to be. Remember what his answer was? Henrietta. When they asked him, where's this year's Super Bowl, and he mentioned his hometown in Oklahoma.
Oh, my God.
He was so far out of it. And I heard an interview with him this week, Tuesday, on the ticket, and they were asking him about that. And he was thinking back, and he said, you know what? That concussion I suffered in the NFC title game was the worst one I had. And he went on to say, if it was by today's rules, he goes, I don't think they would have allowed me to play. Yet he played. He was back in practice on Wednesday and played decently, and the Cowboys won that game. But I went back and looked at some of that stuff. He claimed, and remember, it was only 1 week between games. It wasn't the 2-week thing. And when he got there on Monday, he couldn't remember anything about the NFC title game. And as a matter of fact, I read where the next day he pointed out that on Tuesday he went back and watched the game. And he said this week that he still doesn't have much of a memory of that NFC title game. That's how bad his concussion was.
Was that
so
Jimmy?
When it happened to, yeah, it was Jimmy was there. That was the back-to-back.
Was that when he put in the night before in the Dallas Morning News or wherever it was in 3-inch headlines or whatever you could put it in 3-inch or 6-inch headlines? We'll beat San Francisco, because the year before they had won at Candlestick.
Right, and this time it was Thursday night on Randy Galloway's radio show, and I think Jimmy might have had a Heineken or four before he went on.
No,
and he said, and I went back and looked it up, and he said, "We will win the game," and you could put it in 3-inch letters.
Yep,
and they did. But he also went on to say he kind of walked back a little bit, and he said, this will be a pretty tight game for 3 quarters, but in the last one, we'll wear them out. So I can remember the Friday press conference. Remember they used to do the Friday press conference with the 2 coaches, and San Francisco, who was head coach at that time with the 49ers?
Seifert.
They asked Seifert about it. He goes, well, I don't know, but I think he's got a couple of brass ones.
There you go. Yeah, he did. Mickey, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Okay.
Mickey Spagnola with us, DallasCowboys.com. We're going to keep it here for a few minutes. Brett Favre, by the way, on Patrick Mahomes, be careful. He said he knows that Mahomes wants to play. Favre said he spent most of his career in an era before the NFL took concussions seriously, obviously. For him, whether to play or not play due to a head injury was never a question. I played it in 321 straight games. It goes against everything I stood for when I played. But you got to be smart. I was never faced with a decision that he potentially will face this week, and ultimately the decision may fall on the doctors. And if they choose that he doesn't play, then it's the right move because of the long-term damage. So that's from Brett Favre, who now I think, is 51 years old. And
well, if anybody would know, it'd be him.
Yeah. And Aikman, of course, was knocked out of the game. Eventually, LeVar Arrington on that hit near the sideline that was concussions with him as well.
Yeah, I'm
Steve Young.
Assuming Patrick Mahomes plays this weekend, all signs point to that. And, I think people are probably careful about concussions, but you do wonder in a situation like this, if he's like even borderline, if it's even a close call, like what direction do they go? And I think everybody would probably assume that they're playing him. So, hopefully he's okay. Hopefully there's not anything lingering. And that way, if he takes a big hit this weekend, it's not like compounding, something previously. But, it is pro sports, and it is, the game of football, and this is one of those risks. And at the same time, if this was week 3, he's probably not playing. But it's not week 3. It's the championship game. The trip to the Super Bowl's on the line. So I fully assume he'll be out there. And just for Kansas City fans, I guess fingers crossed, hope he doesn't take too many hits.
That's a drop-off between him and Chad Henne.
Oh, yeah,
it's a drop.
Just a little.
It's precipitous.
You could feel the air getting sucked out of Arrowhead.
Yeah, and especially when Henne threw that pick, you think, oh, man, here they go, because the Browns can come back and at least tie the game or take the lead or whatever, and the nerve-wracking thing. And all Henne had to do was get one first down late in the game. And so thank God for Chiefs fans that he did that. Or we've got the Browns and the Bills in the AFC Championship game, and it might be the apocalypse.
Yeah,
I think it would have been awesome.
Yeah, it would have been great.
I want to read a quote from Alex Smith. I sent this on to 254, who's been back and forth with us about Eric Bieniemy. This is from Alex Smith, who was there when Bieniemy was early on in Kansas City. I think Eric's number one quality, and it was apparent from the first day I met him, was his leadership. Leadership ability, a true leader of men. He was a guy that had played for a long time. He was a great teacher, commanded respect because he gave respect as well. So that was a question. That's from Alex Smith, who's now, of course, longtime quarterback of the Washington Football Club.
Yeah, that's great. That's really nice he said that. I don't think anybody's doubting that Eric Bieniemy's a really good coach. I'm certainly not. I'm not even making the only thing I'm saying on the Eric Bieniemy thing is I would just hope and I would think that it's not all racially related. Now, if that's your argument, that's the argument you want to have, I'm not really going to argue that because neither of us really know that. So if that's the reason why, it's despicable and it's unfortunate. I'm hoping that that's not the reason why. And I would think in today's day and age that there has to be more of a reason than just simply that. Because if that ever was discovered, you talk about...
Oh, my God.
That, if it ever discovered an owner's like, yeah, I know he's super qualified, but he's also black, so we can't hire... and the thing is he's so good, right? He's so good. The Chiefs are in this position. How is he not getting hired? So... Again, totally understand where people are coming from. There's not a long list of reasons for why he shouldn't be a head coach. There's more of a reason for why he should. So, again, it's either racism, which I would hope is not the case, but I know still exists. We haven't magically stomped it out. And or it is just, again, something that's missing. And I don't know. A
couple of things to pass along. The Trust the Podcast is up on the premium section with Craig and also Grayson. That's up. From anything of James Sylvester transferring to Carmelo Jones committing to thoughts about Mateos, Grimes, Stuckey, and Aranda. Dave Aranda at 5:30, plus men's and women's basketball, and the ever-famous mailbag from those who are a part of the premium section as well. Now, when you think of the 5 greatest African-American head football coaches in the NFL, Tony Dungy, Mike Tomlin. Art Shell.
Yeah, Art Shell had a good run.
Dennis Green.
And Lovie Smith.
And Lovie Smith. The thing about Lovie Smith, and yes, I'm absolutely, I'm a fan of his. They fired him at Chicago after a 10-6 year, and he had taken him, of course, lost in the Super Bowl, and they had some ups and downs. They've never matched that since. What was their record this year? Did they get in the playoffs this year? Chicago got in. But they weren't. Were they 10-6?
No.
I don't think they've reached. Now I like what they're doing in Chicago. I don't know what they're going to do with quarterback position.
They've never known.
No, but
finish this sentence.
Who did he win? Who did Lovie Smith go to the Bears with?
Sid Luckman's the last.
No, who did Lovie Smith take to the Super Bowl? What quarterback?
Rex Grossman.
Rex Grossman. Yeah. Jim McMahon was really good, perfect fit for Ditka and those teams in the 80s, 85 team. But they just really have struggled.
But is Sid Luckman the only Hall of Fame type quarterback the Bears have ever had? All the rest of their quarterbacks are guys that were good for a little bit like McMahon, but not Hall of Famers.
You're too young to throw in the name of Sid Luckman. That's my job.
But my point of that is that's how long it's been.
I don't know. I'm trying to think myself. Who were the quarterbacks in the 60s? yeah, they've had just a bunch of goo, right?
I mean, it's,
There's got to be somebody in there. I don't know.
I mean, Mike Tomczak. That's who they've got. I mean, the guys like that, it's, and then you look now, I mean, they're they spent time this year debating between Trubisky and Foles. We can ask Steve Underwood about all these things, our next guest, because he's a longtime NFL exec. But the Bears quarterbacks, I mean, Jim Harbaugh was okay for a little while, but not a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I mean, this is littered with a bunch of average guys. McMahon was there for nearly a decade and did a pretty good job. But other than that, it's been just one name after another. Craig Krenzel, Kyle Orton, Rex Grossman. You mentioned
they had a long time with Cutler, but
All right. Okay. Now, on the text line, the 936, Mickey made the comment, do you want to teach a guy to be a head coach on your dime? Has Bieniemy been a head coach at any level? No, he was a hell of a running back with Colorado. And then he's been a part of some staffs, but he has not been a head coach. And then again, Mike Tomlin was never a head coach before he took the job in Pittsburgh. Lovie Smith was a coordinator throughout his entire career until he got the head coaching job with Chicago. Tony Dungy had been a head coach. No, he had not been a head coach until he got the job in Tampa. Am I right? He was a coordinator with the Steelers.
Yeah.
And Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And then also...
Well, somebody has to give you a shot.
Someone
eventually.
has to be... Mike McCarthy was a coordinator in was he in San Francisco, then Green Bay? Is that right?
Look,
you always...
I mean, Mickey's saying that. I mean, I guess it's because they let Jason Garrett learn to be a head coach on their dime, and it didn't work out, so they wanted somebody to step in.
He was the chosen one.
Yeah, and
that was just a matter as imminent.